Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story. And tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
October had brought to Hogwarts that particular time, when autumn finally claimed its reign. Rain had been drumming against the castle's tall windows for 3 days now, transforming the world beyond the stone walls into a blurred watercolor of greys and browns. Wind howled through the corridors, making the torches tremble in their brackets, and the portraits complain about the drafts. Students hurried from lesson to lesson, wrapped in their robes, leaving wet footprints on the flagstone floors. But for Madame Irma Pince, this was her favorite time of year. The Hogwarts librarian stood by one of the tall windows of her library, clutching a cup of hot tea in her thin hands, watching raindrops race down the glass, forming whimsical patterns. On days like these, the library received the fewest visitors, and those who did appear behaved quietly, almost reverently. The rain created a special atmosphere around the books, one of peace and mystery, as if the castle itself was whispering old stories written on yellowed pages. Madame Pince took a sip of tea, feeling warmth spread through her, and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 in the evening. The last students had left the library half an hour ago, hastily gathering their belongings under her watchful gaze. Now her time had come. The time when she could be alone with her most precious treasures. She set her teacup on the windowsill and moved between the rows of tall bookshelves. Her footsteps echoed dully on the wooden floor, reverberating from the high ceilings. The Hogwarts Library at night was entirely different from its daytime self. Shadows grew deeper, the scent of old paper and leather bindings thicker, and the silence so absolute that one could hear spiders spinning their webs in distant corners. Madame Pince loved this silence. She had been born for libraries, raised among bookshelves and card catalogue drawers. Books never disappointed, never betrayed, never hurt. They simply were, preserving their knowledge patiently and faithfully, waiting for someone who could read them. She reached the heavy oak doors leading to the restricted section. Drawing a key from the pocket of her severe black dress, she unlocked it. The door opened with a quiet creak that always reminded her of old ghosts and forgotten secrets. The restricted section was the library's heart. Here, behind bars and on locked shelves, were kept books containing knowledge unsuitable for young and careless minds. Dark magic, ancient spells, dangerous rituals, all of it waited here in the ghostly light of magical lamps burning with a dim bluish flame. Madame Pince drew her wand. "Lumos," she whispered. The tip of her wand flared with soft golden light, dispelling the deepest shadows. She moved the wand around, illuminating the spines. Ancient Latin inscriptions, runic symbols, some languages she could not even identify. Each book here had its story, its power, its danger. The time had come for the annual inventory. A procedure Madame Pince conducted every October, checking the condition of the most valuable and dangerous volumes. It was tedious, painstaking work, but she never trusted it to anyone else. The books were her responsibility, her duty. She pulled a folded piece of parchment with a list from her pocket and began the inspection. Moving along the shelves, she carefully removed each volume, checked its condition, made notes on the list, and returned it. Some books hissed at her touch, others vibrated as if alive. One book in a black binding even tried to bite her finger, but Madame Pince simply tapped it with her wand, and the volume settled down with an offended grumble. "Wretched thing," she muttered without particular anger. Hours passed unnoticed. The rain beyond the windows did not abate, if anything, it intensified. Somewhere far in the castle, the midnight bell tolled, a dull, melancholy sound that dissolved into the darkness. Madame Pince did not even look up. She was accustomed to working late, losing herself in her work, forgetting about time. Finally, she reached the last shelf, the most remote, darkest one, hidden in a deep corner of the restricted section. Here were kept books so ancient and rare that even she rarely touched them. Some had been here since Armando Dippett's time, perhaps even earlier. Madame Pince raised her wand higher, illuminating the topmost shelf. And then she saw something she had not seen before. Between two thick tomes on alchemy stood a book in silver bindings. She stopped, alert. How long had she been Hogwarts librarian? 32 years. 32 years, during which she had known the location of every book, every volume, every scrap of parchment. And this book, she had never seen it before. Madame Pince reached out, but hesitated for a moment. Then, overcoming an unexpected feeling of unease, she removed the book from the shelf. It was heavy, much heavier than it appeared. The silver bindings were covered with a delicate pattern, resembling a spider's web or leaf veins. In the center of the cover gleamed a symbol Madame Pince recognized instantly, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, outlined by flying ravens. The librarian's heart beat faster. A book connected to one of Hogwarts' founders? How could she have missed it? How had this book even ended up here? She approached the nearest table and carefully placed the volume on the wooden surface. Light from her wand danced on the silver binding, making the symbols shimmer and move. Or did it only seem so to her? Madame Pince leaned closer. There was no title on the spine, no inscription, only that same woven pattern and the diadem symbol. She carefully touched the binding. The metal was warm beneath her fingers, almost alive. And then she felt it. Breath. Not a sound, not a movement of air. Something deeper, more intimate. As if the book itself was breathing, its pages quietly rising and falling in an invisible rhythm. Madame Pince jerked her hand back, stepping away. Magic, old, powerful, incomprehensible magic pulsed from this volume. She felt it with her entire body, as if someone had run cold fingers down her spine. Professional curiosity battled with caution. 32 years of working with dangerous books had taught her to recognize true danger. And this book, it radiated something that provoked both fear and fascination in her simultaneously. Madame Pince reached out again, but this time with her wand at the ready. Her fingers touched the edge of the cover. The book was warm, almost hot. She took a deep breath and carefully opened the volume. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in fine calligraphic script. But unlike most ancient books, the ink had not faded or blurred. On the contrary, the letters seemed to glow with a dim silvery light, pulsing in time with that strange breathing. Madame Pince leaned closer, trying to make out the text. The language was ancient, similar to Latin, but with elements she could not identify. Individual words flashed in her consciousness. Anima, memoria, desiderium, soul, memory, desire. Suddenly the pages turned on their own, creating a soft rustle that tore through the silence. Madame Pince flinched. A new page opened before her, and on it, she saw an image. It was a drawing of a library. Not some abstract library, but this one. Hogwarts. She recognized the tall bookshelves, the Gothic windows, even her own desk by the entrance. But in the drawing, the library was different. Brighter, younger, as if seen through the eyes of someone who loved this place as intensely as she did. Madame Pince felt something stir in her chest. A strange, almost painful feeling of recognition. As if someone had looked into her soul and seen what she never showed anyone. Her love for these walls, for these books, for this silence. The book breathed again beneath her hands, stronger, more insistent. Madame Pince felt a sudden dizziness. The pages seemed to be calling her, beckoning her deeper, promising to reveal secrets, show something incredible. No. She snapped the book shut, jumping back from the table. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her hands trembling. What was that? What had just happened? 32 years of experience screamed about danger. Books that influenced the mind, lured the reader, promising knowledge or power. She knew about them. And this book undoubtedly belonged to that category. Perhaps to an even more dangerous one. Madame Pince stepped back another pace, not taking her eyes off the volume. The silver bindings gleamed dimly in her wand's light. The book lay motionless, but Madame Pince could still feel that breathing, that pulse of old magic. She needed to inform Professor Dumbledore immediately. He would know what to do with this book, He always knew, but it was already well past midnight, and even Hogwarts' headmaster needed sleep. This could wait until morning. And in the meantime, Madame Pince looked around. She could not leave the book here in the restricted section, where someone else might find it. But taking it with her also seemed dangerous. Finally, she made a decision. She would take the book to her office, lock it there, and go to Dumbledore first thing in the morning. She retrieved from a cabinet a clean linen bag she usually used for transporting particularly delicate volumes. Carefully, trying not to touch the book directly, she wrapped the volume in fabric and lifted it. Even through the cloth, she felt the warmth. The book pulsed like a living heart. Madame Pince quickly crossed the restricted section, locked the doors behind her, and headed to her small office, located in the far corner of the library. Her footsteps sounded louder in the night silence, and it seemed to her that the book in her arms grew ever heavier. Finally, she reached the office. It was a cramped room, crammed with shelves of reference books, catalogues, and Madame Pince's personal collection of rare editions. A small window looked out onto the lake, but now beyond it reigned total darkness. She placed the wrapped book on the desk and paused, pondering. Simply leaving it here seemed insufficient. She needed something more. Madame Pince raised her wand. "Colloportus," she whispered, directing the spell at the office door. The lock clicked, sealing with magic. But that was not enough. She looked around the room and saw a small box of red wood standing on one of the shelves. Quickly retrieving it, she unlocked it and carefully placed the wrapped book inside. "Clavis Hermetica," she pronounced, closing the lid of the box. Golden light briefly flashed around the lock, a sealing charm. Not the most powerful, but sufficient for one night. Madame Pince stepped back, watching the box. She no longer felt that breathing, that pulse. The magic held. Good. Suddenly she felt how tired she was. It was already nearly 2 in the morning, and her eyes burned from strain. She needed to go to bed. Early in the morning she would go to Dumbledore, and he would sort out this mysterious find. She glanced once more at the box, made sure the office door was securely locked, extinguished the lamps in the library, and went out into the dark corridor. Rain still drummed against the windows, and wind howled through the empty halls. Madame Pince quickly walked the corridors to her personal quarters, located in a small tower near the library. All the while she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that she had made a mistake. But what? She had locked the book, sealed it, left it in a safe place. In the morning, Dumbledore would decide everything. Finally reaching her quarters, Madame Pince quickly changed and lay down in bed. But sleep would not come. She lay staring at the dark ceiling, and before her eyes, again and again, surfaced the image of that book. The silver bindings, the diadem symbol, that strange warmth. And the drawing of the library. Why had it troubled her so? Why had she felt that pain of recognition? Somewhere far away, another bell tolled. 3 o'clock. Madame Pince closed her eyes and tried to calm herself. Tomorrow. Tomorrow everything would become clear. But deep inside, in that place where premonitions and fears live, she knew that something had already begun. Something she might no longer be able to stop. The next morning Madame Pince woke to grey light seeping through the curtains. The rain had finally ceased, but the sky remained low and overcast, promising new showers by evening. She dressed quickly, skipping breakfast, and headed to the library. Students were already beginning to appear in the corridors, but she barely noticed them, hurrying to her office. The door was locked as she had left it. The sealing charm held. Madame Pince unlocked the door and entered. The box stood on the desk exactly where she had left it. For a moment, Madame Pince hesitated. Should she open it? Perhaps it would be better to take everything straight to Dumbledore. But professional curiosity prevailed. She had to at least make sure the book was in place, that nothing had happened during the night. She raised her wand. Alohomora! The lock clicked, and the lid opened. Madame Pince looked inside, and froze. The box was empty. Only the linen bag lay at the bottom, neatly folded but completely empty. The book was gone. Cold pierced her through. This was impossible. She herself had locked the box, sealed it with magic. The office door had also been locked. No one could have entered. No one could have taken the book. No one except the book itself. Madame Pince spun around sharply, pulling her wand from her pocket. Her heart was pounding so loudly, it seemed it could be heard throughout the library. Suddenly, somewhere among the bookshelves, a sharp sound rang out. Something fell, thudded. Madame Pince burst from the office, gripping her wand. She circled several shelves, entered a small passage between the stacks, and saw her. The girl lay on the floor by one of the reading tables. Her eyes were open, but her gaze was empty, directed somewhere inward. Her arms were spread out, as if she had been trying to catch something invisible, and nearby, on the table, lay an open book, a book in silver bindings. "No," whispered Madame Pince, rushing to the girl. "No, no, no." She recognized her. Eleanor Kestrel, a 7th-year Ravenclaw student. An excellent student, a quiet, polite girl who often stayed late in the library. Madame Pince had even given her permission to use the restricted section for writing her graduation thesis. But how? How had the book ended up here? Madame Pince dropped to her knees beside Eleanor, touching her face. The skin was warm, breathing even. The girl was alive. But her eyes, there was nothing in them. No awareness, no presence. "Miss Kestrel," called Madame Pince, shaking the girl by the shoulder. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" No reaction. The girl continued to lie motionless, staring into emptiness. Madame Pince turned sharply to the book. It lay on the table open, its pages gently stirring as if from an unseen wind. And again that breathing, that pulse of old, dark magic. Madame Pince's heart seemed to stop. She had made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. She should not have left the book unsupervised. Not even for one night. Not even locked and sealed. The magic of this volume was stronger, older than she had thought. And now Eleanor Kestrel had paid for that mistake. Madame Pince rose, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. She had to act. Immediately. First, summon help for the girl. Then, go to Dumbledore, and understand what this book was, and how to save Eleanor before it was too late. She raised her wand, directing it at the ceiling. Expecto Patronum. A silver owl flew from the tip of her wand, circled above her head, and shot through the walls toward the hospital wing. Madame Pince glanced once more at the motionless Eleanor, then at the book breathing on the table. And for the first time in 32 years as Hogwarts librarian, she felt true fear before the power hidden between the pages of old volumes. Madame Poppy Pomfrey arrived at the library 5 minutes after Madame Pince's silver owl flew into the hospital wing. The matron swept in swiftly, her white robes fluttering behind her, her face worried and focused. "Where is she?" asked Pomfrey, looking around. Madame Pince silently pointed to Eleanor Kestrel, who still lay on the floor beside the reading table. The girl had not moved since her discovery. Her eyes remained open, but her gaze was empty, directed somewhere inward. Pomfrey quickly dropped to her knees beside the girl, pulled out her wand, and began diagnostic spells. Silver light ran over Eleanor's body, changing to pale blue, then to dim green. "Pulse normal, breathing steady," the matron muttered, "but consciousness." She leaned closer, waved her wand near the girl's eyes. No reaction. "This is not an ordinary trance, this is something else." "The book," Madame Pince barely managed to say, pointing to the table. Pomfrey rose and approached the table. The Codex Animae lay there open, its pages gently stirring as if from an invisible breath. The matron reached out, but stopped without touching it. "I can feel the magic," she whispered. "Old and very powerful. Madame Pince, what is this book?" "I don't know," replied the librarian, her voice trembling. "I found it last night in the restricted section. I had never seen it before. I tried to protect it, lock it away, but it somehow escaped. And now, this girl." Her voice broke. Pomfrey cast her a quick, sympathetic glance. "This is not your fault, Irma," she said softly, "but we need to get to Professor Dumbledore immediately. I shall take Miss Kestrel to the hospital wing, but her condition, I fear I cannot help her. This is magic beyond my knowledge." She made a movement with her wand, and Eleanor's body rose gently into the air. as if on invisible stretchers. The girl floated through the air, her eyes still staring at nothing. "Go to the headmaster," Pomfrey ordered, "at once, and I shall see to her as best I can." Madame Pince nodded, watching as the matron left the library, leading the floating body of the student before her. Then she turned back to the book. The codex lay motionless, but she still felt that pulse, that breathing. It could not be left here. But touching it again seemed dangerous. Finally, she made a decision. She took from her office a thick leather case, opened it on the table, and using a levitation charm, carefully transferred the book inside. She closed the case, sealed it with several protective charms, and tucked it firmly under her arm. It was time to learn the truth. Blank. The Hogwarts headmaster's office was located in the castle's highest tower. Madame Pince climbed up the long spiral staircase that led to the hidden door behind the stone gargoyle. She spoke the password that Dumbledore had once entrusted to her for emergencies. Sherbet lemon. The gargoyle moved aside, revealing the passage. Madame Pince climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. "Enter," came Dumbledore's calm voice. She opened the door and entered the circular office. Here always reigned a special atmosphere, a wondrous mixture of wisdom, mystery, and safety. The walls were covered with portraits of former headmasters, most of whom dozed in their frames. Various silver instruments spun and glinted on the tables. And behind the large carved desk sat Albus Dumbledore himself. The headmaster looked up at her over his half-moon spectacles. His long silver beard fell almost to his waist, and behind him, Fawkes dozed quietly on his perch, his bright red plumage glowing softly in the morning sun. "Madame Pince," he greeted her, concern audible in his voice. "Poppy Pomfrey has just informed me about Miss Kestrel. Please, sit down and tell me everything that has happened." Madame Pince sank into the chair opposite Dumbledore, placing the case with the book on her lap. Her hands were still trembling. She took a deep breath and began to tell. About the inventory, about the book she had found, about the strange feeling when she had opened it. About how she had tried to protect the volume, but it had vanished from the box. And about Eleanor, found in a trance. Dumbledore listened attentively, without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for several minutes, gazing out the window. His face was serious. "May I look at this book?" he finally asked. Madame Pince nodded and carefully placed the case on the desk. She unsealed the protective charms and opened it. Dumbledore rose and came closer. The Codex Animae lay in the case, its silver bindings gleaming dimly. Dumbledore reached out, but, like Pomfrey before him, stopped without touching it. "Ravenclaw's symbol," he whispered. "And the pattern. Yes, I recognize this style." He raised his eyes to Madame Pince. "Irma, you have found something very rare and very dangerous. This is the Codex Animae, the Codex of the Soul." "The Codex of the Soul," repeated Madame Pince. "I have never heard of such a book." Dumbledore returned to his chair and sat, steepling his fingers under his chin. His blue eyes looked through her, as if into distant memories. "That is not surprising," he said quietly. "The Codex Animae is mentioned only in the most ancient sources, and even there the information is scarce and contradictory. But I once read about it in the personal records of Rowena Ravenclaw, which are kept in the private collection of an old family." He paused. "Rowena created this book at the end of her life, when she felt her time was coming to an end. She wanted to leave behind not just knowledge written in ink on paper, but something more, something living." "Living?" whispered Madame Pince. "Yes. Rowena believed that true knowledge cannot be conveyed in words. It must come through experience, through emotions, through deep understanding. So she created the Codex Animae, a book that does not simply tell, but allows one to experience, to feel, to understand as Rowena herself understood." Dumbledore rose and approached one of the windows. Beyond it spread Hogwarts in the morning light, the castle, the lake, the forbidden forest on the horizon. "But something went wrong," he continued. "The magic with which Rowena endowed this book proved too powerful. Instead of simply showing knowledge, the Codex began to hunt. It sought readers with the strongest desires, the brightest dreams. And instead of teaching them, it created illusions for them. worlds woven from their own wishes. And these people became trapped, understood Madame Pince. Precisely. They lived in their illusions, forgetting about reality. Some never returned. Dumbledore turned to her. Rowena, realizing what she had created, tried to destroy the book. But it turned out that the Codex cannot be destroyed by ordinary methods. The magic that created it was too deep, too intimately connected with the very essence of knowledge and consciousness. Then what did she do? Asked Madame Pince. She hid it. Deep within the castle, in a place known only to her, and she placed a spell on the book that was meant to keep it sleeping, until he fell silent. Until what? Until someone appeared who could control it, or destroy it. Dumbledore returned to the desk. Irma, the question is, why did the Codex awaken now? What awakened it? Madame Pince shook her head. I don't know. I simply found it during inventory. It was standing on a shelf as if it had always been there. But you had not seen it before, said Dumbledore slowly. And you know your library better than anyone. He pondered. Perhaps someone was searching for it. Perhaps someone tried to awaken the old charms. Or, his eyes flashed. Perhaps the Codex itself sensed something. Some imbalance, some need. Before Madame Pince could respond, there came a knock at the door. Dumbledore raised his wand, and the door opened by itself. Professor Flitwick entered, the small wizard with a white beard, head of Ravenclaw House. His face was troubled. Albus, he said, out of breath. Forgive the intrusion, but we have another problem. Tobias Malraux, a sixth-year Hufflepuff student. He was found in a trance in the library 20 minutes ago. Madame Pomfrey has already taken him to the hospital wing. Cold pierced Madame Pince's heart. Another one, she whispered. Dumbledore rose quickly. Phileas, was there a book near the boy? Flitwick nodded. Yes, a strange book in silver bindings. I ordered no one to touch it. Well done, said Dumbledore. Please return to the library, and make sure no one approaches that book. I shall join you presently. Flitwick nodded, and hurried away. Dumbledore turned to Madame Pince. The book is multiplying, he said quietly, or creating copies. This is even more dangerous than I thought. But how? Exclaimed Madame Pince. The book is here, in the case. Dumbledore approached the desk and carefully looked into the case. The Codex still lay there, motionless. This is the original, he said. I can feel its power, but it seems the Codex can create echoes, reflections of itself. And each such reflection is as dangerous as the original. He headed for the door, indicating that Madame Pince should follow. We need to get to the library immediately and secure this second book. And then, he stopped. And then we need to understand how to stop the Codex before it floods the entire castle with its copies. When they arrived at the library, Professor Flitwick was waiting for them by one of the distant tables. The book lay there, an exact copy of the original, the same silver bindings, the same diadem symbol, the same dim breathing of magic. Dumbledore approached carefully, not taking his eyes off the volume. He drew his wand and spoke a quiet spell. Golden light wrapped around the book, tightening, but then dispersed as if encountering an invisible barrier. Ravenclaw's protective charms, he muttered. Old and very strong. He tried another spell, then another. Neither worked. Madame Pince watched with cold in her chest. If even Dumbledore could not seal the book. Albus, said Flitwick quietly. Perhaps we should try to destroy it. Dumbledore shook his head. Rowena Ravenclaw's magic was one of the most powerful of its time. If she could not destroy the Codex, I doubt we shall succeed. But... He fell silent, pondering. We can try. He stepped back several paces, raising his wand. His face became focused, his eyes gleamed with determination. Incendio Maxima, he called out. Blazing flames burst from the tip of his wand, wrapping around the book. The fire was so bright that everyone was forced to turn away. shielding themselves with their hands. The library filled with heat and light. But when the flames died down, the book still lay on the table, undamaged. Not even the corner of a page was charred. Sectum sempra, Dumbledore tried another spell. Invisible blades rushed over the book, but it remained whole. Bombarda! An explosion shook the library, making the books tremble on the shelves. But the book still lay untouched, as if made not of paper and leather, but of something eternal and immutable. Dumbledore lowered his wand. For the first time, Madame Pince saw something like helplessness in his eyes. "It is useless," he said quietly. "The magic protecting the Codex is stronger than any destructive force. Rowena created it to survive centuries. And it seems she succeeded in that." "Then what shall we do?" asked Madame Pince, desperation breaking through in her voice. Dumbledore turned to her. That calm gleam of intelligence appeared again in his eyes. "We need to understand what the Codex wants," he said. "If we cannot destroy it by force, perhaps we can persuade it, or find a way to break the magical connection holding the victims captive." He headed for the exit, indicating the others should follow. "We need to gather all possible information about the Codex Animae. I shall go to my private library. Phileas, please check the Ravenclaw archives. Perhaps there are some records about this book. And you, Irma," he turned to Madame Pince, "please review the oldest volumes in the restricted section. Look for anything concerning mind magic, illusions, mental connections." They dispersed, each in their own direction. Madame Pince returned to the restricted section, her thoughts chaotic and anxious. 2 victims already. How many more would there be if they did not find a solution? She spent the rest of the day sorting through ancient volumes. Books on curses, on mind magic, on ancient rituals. Her eyes burned from strain, her fingers blackened with dust, but she continued searching. And when evening came and the castle plunged into twilight, Madame Pince suddenly felt that something had changed. The library was too quiet, not simply quiet, dead. As if everything around had held its breath, she slowly rose from the table, looking around. The bookshelves seemed taller in the dim light, the shadows deeper. And then she heard it, whispering, quiet, almost imperceptible, as if hundreds of voices were speaking simultaneously, but so quietly that words could not be distinguished. Madame Pince slowly walked between the rows of bookshelves, listening. The whispering grew louder, and suddenly she understood. It came from the books themselves. The volumes on the shelves trembled, their pages rustling quietly, as if they were all breathing together. Madame Pince drew her wand but did not know against what to use magic. This was not an attack, this was an awakening. "Lumos," she whispered. Light from her wand flared, illuminating the nearest shelves. And then she saw what made her heart beat faster. On one of the shelves, where earlier there had been empty space, now stood a book. A book in silver bindings. Madame Pince quickly approached the adjacent rows. There, on another shelf, another identical book. And another. And another. The Codex was multiplying. She rushed back toward the exit, but on her way, saw yet another book. And another. They appeared everywhere, as if growing from the very shelves, as if they had always been there. Madame Pince ran out of the restricted section, and saw what finally frightened her. In the library's main hall, 3 students sat at tables. They were reading books in silver bindings. Their eyes were wide open, but their gazes were empty. "No!" she cried out, rushing to the nearest student. It was a Slytherin girl, apparently a 7th year. Her hands lay on the open pages, fingers barely touching the paper. Madame Pince shook her by the shoulder. "Wake up! Wake up, at once!" No reaction. The girl continued to stare at the book, her lips moving slightly as if she was reading to herself. Madame Pince raised her wand and cried out, "Expecto Patronum!" The silver owl flew from her wand and shot through the walls toward Dumbledore's office. Then she turned to the other students, one boy from Gryffindor and another from Ravenclaw, both in a trance, both reading the Codex. Selina Harrick from Slytherin. Finian O'Connor from Gryffindor. She recognized them both, 7th-year students, both excellent pupils. "What is happening?" whispered Madame Pince, looking at them helplessly. And then she felt it again, that breathing, that pulse of magic coming from the books. But now it was stronger, more insistent, as if the Codex had finally fully awakened, as if it was no longer hiding, as if the hunt had begun. Dumbledore arrived several minutes later, along with Professors McGonagall and Flitwick. Pomfrey hurried after them with a medical bag. "3 more," said Madame Pince, pointing to the students. "And the books, they are everywhere, on shelves, on tables. Dozens of them, perhaps more." Dumbledore quickly surveyed the library. His face was grim. "The Codex has begun its true attack," he said quietly. "It no longer waits for people to come to it. It seeks readers itself." "Albus, what shall we do?" asked McGonagall, her voice unusually tense.
Dumbledore approached the nearest student,
Finian, and carefully touched his forehead. He closed his eyes, concentrating. "His consciousness is somewhere far away," he whispered, "entangled in a world of illusions. I sense happiness, deep, all-consuming happiness. He is living his dream." "Can we pull him out of there?" asked Flitwick. Dumbledore slowly opened his eyes. "By force? No. That would only cause harm. The only way is to help them realize they are trapped, help them see the illusion themselves." He turned to Madame Pince. "Irma, I fear this task may fall on your shoulders." "On mine?" She was surprised. "But why?" "Because the Codex appeared before you," replied Dumbledore. "Not before students, not before professors, before you. Perhaps it chose you for a reason. Perhaps you are meant to become the key to the solution." Madame Pince felt cold embrace her heart. "But I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "We shall find a way," said Dumbledore firmly. "But first we must protect the rest of the castle. McGonagall, please announce to all students that the library is closed until further notice. No one is to enter here. Phileas, help me establish protective barriers." The professors rushed to carry out the orders. Pomfrey took the 3 new victims to the hospital wing. And Madame Pince remained standing in the middle of her library, looking at the books that had flooded the shelves. 5 students in a trance. 5 young lives entangled in a web of illusions. And she, Madame Irma Pince, librarian who had spent her entire life among books, now had to find a way to save them from a book. Night came, but Madame Pince could not sleep. She sat in her office, surrounded by dozens of open books. Dumbledore had brought her several volumes from his private collection, ancient manuscripts on mind magic, on illusions, and mental manipulations. But the more she read, the more she understood the scale of the problem. The Codex Animae was not simply a magical object. It was the creation of Rowena Ravenclaw's brilliant mind, created from the deepest understanding of human nature. It did not control the mind by force. It gave people what they most desired. And that was what made it so dangerous. How could one save someone from their own dream? Madame Pince rose and approached the window. From outside came quiet rustling. Dumbledore and Flitwick were installing the last protective charms on the library doors. No one would be able to enter without permission. But this did not solve the main problem. 5 students were still captive. Suddenly she heard a quiet knock on the office door. She turned and saw Dumbledore standing in the doorway. His face looked tired. This night had been difficult for everyone. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Madame Pince nodded. Dumbledore entered and sat in the chair opposite her desk. For several minutes they were silent, each immersed in their own thoughts. "Irma," Dumbledore finally spoke, "I have been thinking a great deal about what is happening, and there is one thing I wish to show you." He drew from his pocket a small silver mirror, no larger than a palm. He placed it on the desk between them. "This is the Mirror of Souls," he explained. "An ancient magical object that allows one to see a person's inner world, their thoughts, feelings, dreams. I believe that with its help, you will be able to see the illusions in which the students are dwelling, without immersing yourself in them, but simply observing." Like through a window, Madame Pince looked at the mirror. Its surface was dim, almost matte, reflecting only blurred shadows. And if I see their illusions, she said slowly, what then? How can I help them realize it is not reality? You must create a bridge, replied Dumbledore. A message that will penetrate through the illusion, something that will resonate in their hearts, something that will make them doubt. He leaned forward. Irma, you have observed these students for many years. You have seen them in the library. You know what they read, what interests them. Perhaps you know them better than they think. Madame Pince felt something stir in her chest. Truth. She did know these students. Eleanor Kestrel, who always sat by the window and read books about great witches. Tobias Malraux, who came early in the morning when no one else was awake and looked for books on family magic. Selina Harrick with her perfectly organized notes and eternal fear of making mistakes. Finian O'Connor, who dreamed of heroic deeds and sought stories about great duelists. She knew them, perhaps not closely, not personally, but she knew their desires, reflected in the books they chose. How does this mirror work? She asked. Dumbledore smiled, with a barely visible smile. You must hold it in one hand and touch the person's forehead with the other hand, the person whose inner reality you wish to see. The mirror will show you images, but remember, this is only a reflection. You will not be able to intervene directly, you can only observe. And how do I create that bridge you spoke of? Through emotions, through memories, through something that has meaning for them in the real world. Dumbledore rose. But you must understand this yourself. I cannot tell you exactly how to do it. Each person is unique, and the path to their consciousness is also unique. He moved toward the door but stopped at the threshold. Irma, I believe in you. You love books because they preserve knowledge. But the most important knowledge is understanding people, and that is the knowledge needed most of all right now. He left, leaving Madame Pince alone with the mirror and her thoughts. She took the mirror in her hands. It was unexpectedly warm, as if alive. The surface shimmered dimly, waiting. It was time to act. The hospital wing was quiet and dim in the nightlight. Madame Pomfrey had arranged all 5 students in a separate section, screened off from the rest of the ward by white curtains. They lay in beds motionless, their eyes closed now. Pomfrey had given them a calming potion, so that at least outwardly they looked as if they were sleeping peacefully. But Madame Pince knew the truth. They were not sleeping. They were somewhere far away, in worlds created by the Codex Animae from their own desires. She approached the first bed. Eleanor Kestrel, a girl with dark hair and fine features. Even now, in this ghostly state, she looked determined, ambitious. Madame Pince sat on a chair beside the bed. She took out the Mirror of Souls and placed it on her lap. She took a deep breath and reached out with her left hand, touching Eleanor's forehead. Her right hand held the mirror. Ostende animam, she whispered the words Dumbledore had given her. The mirror flashed with dim light. Its surface trembled, then cleared like water in a pond after rain. And Madame Pince saw a great hall filled with people, wizards and witches in festive robes. On a platform stood Eleanor, but not the 17-year-old girl lying in the bed. This Eleanor was older, more confident. She held in her hands some award, a golden statuette that shone in the light of 1,000 candles, voices of applause, cries of admiration. Someone was giving a speech, praising Eleanor as the most outstanding witch of her generation. Her face glowed with happiness and pride. Madame Pince watched this scene, feeling pain in her chest. There it was, Eleanor's most cherished desire. To be recognized, to be the best, to be the one everyone admired. And the Codex had given her this, created a perfect world where all her dreams had come true. How could one make someone give this up? Madame Pince removed her hand from the girl's forehead. The mirror dimmed, the images vanished. She sat quietly, pondering. Eleanor had always been the best student of Ravenclaw. Highest marks, most complex essays, most books read. But behind this perfection hid fear. Fear of not meeting expectations. Fear of not being good enough. And it was precisely this fear that made her vulnerable to the Codex. Madame Pince slowly rose and moved to the next bed. Tobias Malraux. A boy with reddish curls and freckles on his nose. He looked younger than his 16 years, almost childishly defenseless. She repeated the ritual. touched his forehead, whispered the spell. The mirror cleared again, and what she saw made her eyes fill with tears. An ordinary kitchen. A warm fireplace, the smell of freshly baked bread. At the table sat 3 people, Tobias and his parents. Madame Pince did not know them, but understood instantly that it was them. His mother, with a warm smile, was pouring tea. His father was telling some story, and Tobias was laughing, his face glowing with happiness. A simple scene. An ordinary family at dinner. But for Tobias, this was everything. Madame Pince knew his story. She had heard other students speaking about him in whispers. His parents had died 3 years ago during an attack by dark wizards. Tobias had grown up with his aunt's family, who loved him but could not replace those he had lost. And the Codex had returned them to him. Created an illusion where they were alive, where they were together, where everything was as it should have been. How could one take away someone's dead parents a second time? Madame Pince pulled her hand away, unable to watch any longer. Tears ran down her cheeks. She wiped them, trying to calm herself. This was cruel. What the Codex was doing was cruel in its mercy. It gave people the greatest happiness they could imagine, and then held them captive in that happiness. She moved to the 3rd bed. Selina Herrick. The girl from Slytherin, always perfectly groomed, always with a straight back and a severe expression on her face. The mirror showed her a world without mistakes. A world where every essay was perfect, every spell worked flawlessly, every lesson passed without a single stumble. Selina in this world was confident, relaxed, happy. She no longer feared failure because failure did not exist, and Finian O'Connor, the boy from Gryffindor, the mirror showed him an epic battle. He stood before an enormous dragon, his wand glowing, and around him other students gathered, looking with admiration and gratitude. He was a hero. He was the one everyone honored. Madame Pince reviewed all 5, saw their deepest desires, their secret dreams, and understood how difficult the task would be. How could one create a bridge to consciousness entangled in illusion? She returned to her office as dawn was breaking. She sat at her desk, looking at the pile of books before her. Somewhere here must be the key, something that would help her understand. And suddenly, as the first ray of sunlight touched the window, a thought came to her. She could not pull them from the illusions by force. She could not simply tell them it was unreal. But she could plant a seed of doubt, something small, delicate, something that would gradually grow in their consciousness until they themselves saw the truth. But how to do this? Madame Pince rose and approached the shelf where the most ancient books on charms stood. Her fingers ran over the spines until they stopped at 1 volume. Incantamentum Memoriae, the spell of memories. She knew this spell. It allowed one to weave true memories into dreams or visions, not to control, not to manipulate, but simply to remind. If she could modify this spell, adapt it to the mental connections created by the Codex. It was a risk. It might not work, but it was the only idea she had. Madame Pince opened the book and began to read, to write, to plan. The light beyond the window grew brighter. A new day was being born over Hogwarts. And in the hospital wing, 5 students continued to sleep their strange sleep, entangled in the web of their own desires, not knowing that someone was trying to find a way to bring them home. Dawn came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Grey November light seeped through the library windows, illuminating Madame Pince, who sat at her desk surrounded by open books and parchments covered with dense notes. She had not slept all night. Her eyes burned with fatigue, her fingers were stained with ink, but her mind worked clearly and focused. Before her lay the volume, Incantamentum Memoriae, open to a page with a complex diagram of a magic circle, the spell of memories. Ancient magic that allowed one to weave true memories into dreams. But the Codex Animae created not dreams, it wove entire worlds, living and convincing. Could this spell be adapted to such complex magic? Madame Pince took a fresh quill and began writing the modification. She needed to change the spell's focus, not simply to weave in a memory, but to create a bridge. A magical connection that would penetrate through the illusion and reach the student's true consciousness. When the clock struck 8 in the morning, she finally set down her quill. The spell was ready. At least, theoretically. The time had come to test it in practice. She took her wand, the Mirror of Souls and her notes, and headed to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey met her at the door. The matron looked no better than Madame Pince, dark circles under her eyes, a worried expression on her face. "No changes," she said quietly, even before Madame Pince could ask. "They are still in the same state, breathing stable, heartbeat normal, but consciousness. They are somewhere very far away." Madame Pince nodded. "I wish to try something," she said. "A spell that might help me reach them." Pomfrey looked at her doubtfully but nodded. "Do what you think necessary. I shall be nearby in case something goes wrong." Madame Pince walked to the screened section where the 5 students lay. They looked peaceful, almost serene. If not for their empty eyes beneath closed lids, one might have thought they were simply sleeping. She approached Eleanor Kestrel's bed. The girl had been the first victim, and therefore had been in the illusion's captivity the longest. If the spell would work on anyone, it would be on her. Madame Pince opened her notes on the chair beside her, drew her wand, and began drawing a magic circle around the bed. Silver runes flared at the touch of her wand, hanging in the air, forming an intricate pattern. The circle closed. Madame Pince felt the magic activate, a quiet hum, a barely perceptible vibration in the air. Now she needed to choose a memory, something real, something important for Eleanor. Something that could resonate with her consciousness, even through the thickness of illusion. Madame Pince closed her eyes, remembering. Eleanor in the library. How many times had she seen this girl? Hundreds. But there was one moment that was particularly clearly remembered. It had been last year, late in the evening. Eleanor sat by the window, reading an enormous tome on transfiguration. Madame Pince had approached to remind her the library would be closing soon. And then she saw that the girl was crying, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but tears were running down her cheeks. "Miss Kestrel?" Madame Pince had asked then. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor had quickly wiped her eyes, trying to smile. "Yes, Madame Pince. Just, sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, it will never be enough. There is always someone cleverer, more talented, better." Madame Pince had sat down beside her then. "Miss Kestrel," she had said gently, "true wisdom is not in being better than everyone. It is in understanding that perfection does not exist. There is only the path, constant learning, constant growth. And you are on the right path." Eleanor had looked at her in surprise, then nodded. They never spoke of that conversation again, but from that day something had changed. Eleanor had become less tense, less obsessed with her perfection. This was the right memory. This was the truth that could break through the illusion. Madame Pince raised her wand and touched it to Eleanor's forehead. Then she directed the wand to the center of the magic circle. "Memoria vera, transit umbras," she whispered, pouring all her concentration into the words. "Duci am ad luctem." True memory, pass through the shadows, lead her to the light. The magic circle flared with bright light. The runes began to spin, forming a stream of energy that stretched toward Eleanor. Madame Pince felt the spell activate, felt it penetrate through that invisible wall that separated the girl's consciousness from the real world. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Eleanor shuddered. Barely noticeably, but Madame Pince saw it. The girl's eyelids trembled, her fingers twitched. Madame Pince's heart beat faster. It was working. The spell was working. But then the trembling stopped. Eleanor froze motionless again, and the magic circle faded, having exhausted its energy. Madame Pince lowered her wand, feeling disappointment and fatigue. Almost. She had almost reached Eleanor. But not enough. The illusion was too strong, too deep. She needed more. Not just one memory, she needed to understand the very nature of the illusions. To understand what exactly was holding the students captive. And for that, she needed to return to the source. To the Codex Animae itself. The case with the original book still stood in Madame Pince's office, sealed with protective charms. She unsealed it carefully, as if afraid the book would leap out and attack. But the codex lay motionless, its silver bindings gleaming dimly in the daylight. That strange pulse, that breathing, it was still there, but seemed weaker than before, as if the book too was tired. Madame Pince sat at the desk, looking at the volume. She was afraid to open it again. She remembered that feeling when she had first touched the pages, how the illusion had almost drawn her in. But now she understood. The Codex was not simply a trap. It was the creation of a brilliant mind, created for a certain purpose. And if she wanted to understand how to save the students, she needed to understand that purpose. She reached out and opened the book. The pages breathed again beneath her touch. Ancient runes glowed with dim silvery light. But this time Madame Pince did not try to read the words. Instead, she closed her eyes and allowed the book's magic to touch her consciousness, and she saw. Not words, not images, memories. She saw Rowena Ravenclaw, not as she was depicted in portraits, grand, unreachable, perfect, but real. An old woman with grey hair and tired eyes. She sat in a high tower, that very Ravenclaw tower that still stood in Hogwarts, and was writing. Before her lay a volume in silver bindings, and she dipped her quill in ink, writing not words but the very essence of knowledge. Madame Pince felt her thoughts as if they were her own. Knowledge is not simply facts, not simply words on paper. True knowledge is understanding, feeling, experience. How can I pass on to the next generations, not what I know, but how I came to understand it? Rowena dreamed of creating a book that would not simply tell, but allow one to feel, to experience, to understand as deeply as she herself understood after a long life of learning. And she put into the Codex everything, her wisdom, her experience, her magic, but also her desire. The desire for others to learn, for them to understand. But something went wrong. Madame Pince saw how Rowena first opened the completed Codex, how her face changed from pride to horror. The book was too powerful. Instead of showing the path to knowledge, it showed the path to illusions. Instead of teaching, it deceived. Rowena had tried to fix it, had worked for months, years, but the magic she had put into the Codex was too deep. It had become part of the book itself, not subject to change or destruction. Eventually, Rowena understood. The only way to stop the book was to hide it, to place a sleeping spell on it, hoping that someday, perhaps, someone would be able to find a way to control it. But before hiding the Codex, Rowena had left a message in it. Not in words, but in the very magic of the book. True knowledge comes not from the realization of desires, but from understanding their nature. Wisdom lies in seeing the difference between dream and reality, and choosing reality, even when the dream is more beautiful. The vision faded. Madame Pince opened her eyes, feeling tears running down her cheeks. She understood. The Codex was not evil. It was tragic. The creation of a great mind that had gone out of control. And the only way to defeat it was not through force, but through understanding. To help the victim see what Rowena had seen. The difference between illusion and truth. But how? Madame Pince closed the book and rose. She approached the mirror of souls again, which lay on the desk. If she could see the students, illusions, perhaps she could see more. Not just the surface happiness, but the depth, the cracks, what even the students themselves might not realize. She returned to the hospital wing, this time with new understanding and new purpose. Eleanor Kestrel. Madame Pince sat again beside her bed, holding the mirror of souls. She touched the girl's forehead and whispered the spell. The mirror cleared, showing the same scene. The great hall, applause, the award. But this time Madame Pince looked deeper. Behind the smile on Eleanor's face. Behind the gleam of the award. Behind the loud cries of admiration. And she saw what she had not seen before. Emptiness. Eleanor stood on the platform, surrounded by glory and recognition, but in her eyes was emptiness. She was smiling, but the smile did not touch her soul. She held the award but felt no true joy. Because there was no challenge, no effort, no feeling of achievement that comes when you truly accomplish something. The illusion had given her everything she dreamed of, but it was empty, like sweets without taste. Madame Pince pulled away from the mirror, her heart beating faster. There it was. There was the crack in the illusion. Somewhere deep inside, Eleanor knew something was wrong. She just needed help realizing it. She moved to Tobias. Again the mirror, again the spell. The kitchen, the parents, the warmth of family. But Madame Pince looked more carefully. Tobias's father was telling a story and the boy was laughing, but something about this story was wrong. It was too simple, too predictable, not like real memories should be. And his mother, she was smiling a perfect smile, too perfect. Tobias's real mother probably did not always smile. She had her own worries, her own fatigues, her own weaknesses, but the illusion showed only perfection. And somewhere deep, in a corner of his heart, Tobias knew this. He knew these were not his real parents. He was just afraid to admit it. Selina Herrick. Her world of perfection. Every essay flawless, every spell ideal. But Madame Pince saw the expression on the girl's face. Boredom. Fatigue. When there is no possibility of making mistakes, there is no possibility of growing. No challenge, no meaning. And Finian O'Connor. His heroic battle with the dragon. The applause of other students. But the dragon was not real. The battle had no real risk. The glory was empty. And Finian, somewhere in the depths of his soul, felt this. Madame Pince pulled away from the mirror, her thoughts working feverishly. She saw now. All of them, all five, somewhere deep down understood that something was wrong. The illusions were not perfect, could not be. Because real life is not perfect. And it is precisely this imperfection that makes it real. She needed to create bridges. Not simply reminders of reality, but something deeper. Emotional connections that would resonate with those cracks she had seen in the illusions. For Eleanor, a memory of true achievement. A moment when she overcame something difficult and felt real pride. For Tobias, a true memory of his parents. Not perfect, but real, with all their flaws and their real love. For Selina, a memory of a mistake that taught her something important. For Finian, a memory of true friendship, more valuable than glory. Madame Pince returned to her office and began to work. She modified the memory spell for each student separately, weaving specific images and emotions into the magical formulas. It took all day. The sun was already setting when she finally finished. 5 separate spells, each tuned to a specific person, to their specific fears and desires. The time had come to try again. Evening light filled the hospital wing with a soft golden glow. Madame Pince stood in the middle of the 5 beds, holding her wand and her notes. She began with Eleanor. She drew the magic circle, activated the spell. But this time she was not simply sending a memory. She was weaving in emotion. The feeling of true achievement that Eleanor had felt that time when she had first performed a complex transfiguration spell after weeks of failures. Memoria vera cortangat veritatem monstret, she whispered. True memory, touch the heart, show the truth. The magic circle flared. Energy flowed toward Eleanor. And this time, the girl shuddered more strongly. Her face twitched as if she was experiencing something painful. Her eyelids trembled. Madame Pince held her breath. Come on, Eleanor, see the truth, understand. But then, something changed. The air in the hospital wing became colder. Madame Pince felt frost run down her spine. All 5 students suddenly shuddered simultaneously. Their bodies tensed, their faces contorted. What is happening? Cried Madame Pomfrey, running from her office. Madame Pince felt it, the pulse of magic. Familiar, but stronger than ever. The Codex was responding. It had sensed her interference and was strengthening the illusions, trying to hold its victims. It is defending itself, whispered Madame Pince. Eleanor calmed again, but now on her face appeared an expression of deep, almost blissful peace. As if the illusion had become even stronger, even more convincing. Madame Pince lowered her wand, feeling helpless. She had almost reached Eleanor, almost broken through the illusion, but the Codex had proved stronger. How could she fight magic created by Rowena Ravenclaw herself? Suddenly, the hospital wing doors opened. Dumbledore entered, his face serious. "Irma," he said quietly. "I felt a surge of magic." "What happened?" Madame Pince told him everything. About the modified spell, about the cracks in the illusions, about how the Codex had responded by strengthening its influence. Dumbledore listened attentively, occasionally nodding. When she finished, he approached Eleanor's bed and touched her forehead. "She is on the edge," he said quietly. "You almost reached her, but the Codex is stronger than one person, even one as dedicated as you." He turned to Madame Pince. "But if we can weaken one illusion, free one person, the rest may be easier." "How?" asked Madame Pince. "I need your permission," said Dumbledore, "to add my magic to yours. Together we may be strong enough to break through." Madame Pince nodded without hesitation. They stood on either side of Eleanor's bed. Madame Pince drew the magic circle again, but this time Dumbledore added his runes, ancient symbols that glowed with golden light. "Together," he said. They raised their wands simultaneously. "Memoria vera, cor tangat, veritatem monstret." A double wave of magic struck the invisible wall that separated Eleanor from reality. The room flared with bright light. Madame Pince felt energy flowing through her, stronger than anything she had felt before. And suddenly, a crack. Not physical, but Madame Pince felt it. The illusion shuddered, weakened, and through that crack she saw Eleanor, the real Eleanor, fighting inside, trying to break free. But then the magic was exhausted. The light faded, and Eleanor froze motionless again. Almost. They had been so close. Dumbledore lowered his wand, looking tired. "The Codex is stronger than I expected," he said quietly. "But you are on the right path, Irma. Continue. Do not give up. Eleanor is almost free. She just needs one more push. One last moment of clarity." He left, leaving Madame Pince alone with the students. She sat on a chair, feeling exhaustion, but also hope. Eleanor was close, very close, and if she could free at least one person, the rest would have a chance. She just had to find that last key, that last message that would break through all the Codex's defenses and reach Eleanor's heart. And suddenly a thought came to her. Not a memory, not an emotion, but a question. A simple but profound question that could make Eleanor see the truth. Madame Pince rose, her fatigue vanishing, replaced by new determination. She knew what to do. And tomorrow morning, when her strength was restored, she would try once more. This time she would succeed. She had to succeed. Because 5 young lives depended on her. Morning came cold and clear. Snow that had fallen during the night lay in a thin layer on Hogwarts roofs, and the world seemed cleaner, fresher. Madame Pince stood by her office window, watching the sun rise over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She had slept only a few hours, but felt strangely alert. In her head spun that question which had come to her in the evening. Simple, but powerful. Is this truly what you want? Not, this is an illusion. Not, return to reality. But simply, is this truly what you want? Because the real question was not what was real and what was not. The question was about choice. About each person having to decide for themselves what they truly desired. The illusion of perfection or reality with all its flaws. Madame Pince took her wand, notes, and the Mirror of Souls, and set out for the hospital wing. This was the last chance. If this did not work, she did not know what else could be done. The hospital wing greeted her with silence. Madame Pomfrey was already up, checking on the student's condition. She nodded to Madame Pince without asking anything. Hope mixed with fear was readable in her eyes. Madame Pince approached Eleanor's bed. The girl lay motionless, her face peaceful, almost carefree. But now Madame Pince knew that behind this peace hid a struggle. Somewhere deep inside, Eleanor was trying to break free. She drew the magic circle, already the 4th time in these days. Runes flared at the touch of her wand, hanging in the air. But this time she added something new. In the center of the circle she drew a symbol, a stylized image of Ravenclaw's diadem, the very symbol that was on the Codex's cover. If the book responded to her interference, perhaps it could also listen, understand. Madame Pince touched Eleanor's forehead with one hand, holding her wand over the symbol with the other. "Eleanor," she whispered, putting all her willpower into the words. I know where you are now. I have seen your world. It is beautiful. It gives you everything you dreamed of. Recognition, glory, perfection. She paused, allowing the words to seep through the magic. But I wish to ask you about one thing. Is this truly what you want? Not what you think you should want. Not what others expect of you. But what your heart truly desires. The magic circle pulsed, transmitting her words. Madame Pince felt the spell activate, penetrate through the barriers. Do you remember that evening in the library? She continued more softly. When you were crying over the book on transfiguration, you said that no matter how hard you tried, it would never be enough. And I told you that perfection does not exist. There is only the path. She felt Eleanor shudder slightly. That world you are in now gives you perfection without the path, recognition without effort, glory without struggle. But does this truly make you happy? Is this truly what your soul desires? The magic grew stronger. Madame Pince felt the Codex responding again, trying to strengthen the illusion. But this time she did not retreat. True happiness comes not from achieving perfection, she whispered, but from the process, from the effort. From that moment when you overcome something difficult and feel true pride. Not because everyone admires you, but because you yourself know you have achieved something important. Eleanor shuddered more strongly. Her eyelids trembled. So I ask you again, Eleanor, is this truly what you want? Empty perfection? Or do you wish to return to the real world, where there are challenges, where there are failures, but where there is also true growth? The choice is yours, finished Madame Pince. I cannot pull you out by force. Only you can decide. What do you choose? Silence. Long, heavy silence. The magic circle glowed, waiting. And then, Eleanor opened her eyes. Not slowly, not gradually. Suddenly, as if she had dived from the depths to the surface. Her eyes were clear, conscious, alive. Madame Pince, she whispered hoarsely. The librarian's heart was beating so loudly, it seemed it could be heard throughout the wing. Eleanor, she could barely speak the name. You have returned. The girl sat up in bed, disoriented, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with tears. I saw. I was there. It was so real. Her voice broke. But you were right. It was empty. All that recognition, all that glory. I felt nothing, as if I was watching someone else. And then I heard your question. And I understood that I did not want that. Not truly. Madame Pince embraced her, feeling the girl tremble. It is all right, she whispered. You are free. You made the choice. Madame Pomfrey rushed to them, her face glowing with relief and joy. She began checking Eleanor, asking questions, making sure the girl was truly well. And Madame Pince slowly rose, looking at the other 4 students. 1 free. 4 remained. But now she knew it was possible. She had found the key. Eleanor did not go to her dormitory. She insisted on staying. Helping. And Madame Pince understood it was right. Perhaps Eleanor, who had just broken free from the illusion, could help others do the same. They approached Tobias Malraux's bed. The boy lay motionless, an expression of deep peace on his face. Madame Pince took the Mirror of Souls, showed Eleanor the illusion in which Tobias dwelt. The girl watched the scene of the family dinner, and her eyes filled with tears again. His parents, she whispered. I heard about it. They died several years ago. Yes, confirmed Madame Pince. And the Codex returned them to him, or at least the illusion of them. How can I ask him to let this go? Eleanor was silent for a long time, watching Tobias. My grandmother died when I was 12, she finally said quietly. I loved her very much, and for the first months after her death, I had dreams where she was alive, where we were together again. And every morning when I woke up, it was like losing her again, and again. She turned to Madame Pince. Eventually I understood something. Those dreams did not return my grandmother to me. They kept me in the past. Did not allow me to move on, to remember her properly. True love is not in holding on to an illusion, but in letting go, preserving the memories. Madame Pince nodded slowly. Truth. Painful, difficult truth. Together, they drew the magic circle around Tobias's bed. This time, Madame Pince allowed Eleanor to speak with her. Tobias. Eleanor began gently, holding his hand. I did not know your parents, but I know you. I have seen how you come to the library early in the morning, when no one else is awake. How you read books about family magic, about protecting those close to you. You carry their memory in your heart. And that is beautiful. The magic circle pulsed, transmitting the words. But that world you are in now, Eleanor continued, does not return them to you. It gives you only a shadow, an illusion of what you think they should have been. But your real parents, they were more than an illusion. They were real people, with their own flaws and their own love. Madame Pince took up. And they loved you, Tobias. True love cannot be recreated in an illusion. It lives in memories. In how you carry their values. In what kind of man you are becoming thanks to their upbringing. So the question is not whether you want them back, said Eleanor, squeezing his hand tighter. The question is how you wish to remember them. As an illusion that keeps you in the past, or as real people whose love helps you live on. To let go does not mean to forget, whispered Madame Pince. It means allowing yourself to live. Allowing yourself to be happy again, not feeling guilty for moving forward. I think that is what your parents would have wanted. For you to live, to truly live. Silence. Long, heavy. Madame Pince almost lost hope, and then Tobias began to cry. Without opening his eyes, without moving. Just tears began to flow down his cheeks, slowly, quietly. Forgive me, he whispered, still not waking. Forgive me, Mum, Dad, I love you, but I must go. And his eyes opened. He looked at them through tears, his face contorted with pain and relief simultaneously. They were not real, he whispered. I knew. Deep inside I always knew. But it was so hard to let go. Eleanor embraced him, and he cried on her shoulder. Not from grief, from liberation. Madame Pince turned away, wiping her own tears. 2 free. 3 remained. Selina Harrick proved unexpectedly simpler. When Madame Pince and Eleanor told her about the world without mistakes, about perfection without challenge, Selina understood quickly. I always feared failure, she said when she woke. Thought that one mistake would destroy everything. But in that world where mistakes did not exist, there also was no growth. I just stood in place, pretending to move forward. Tobias, still shaken but already stronger, helped them with Finian O'Connor. The boy from Gryffindor dreamed of heroism, of glory. But when they asked him whether true heroism lay in the absence of fear, he understood. Heroes are not those who do not fear, he said, waking, but those who act despite fear. In that world I feared nothing, because there was no real risk, and that means there was no real heroism. 4 out of 5. Only one remained, the 5th student, a young girl from Ravenclaw named Katrina, whom Madame Pince did not know well. She had fallen into the trance last, and her illusion was the most complex, a world where she could speak with books, where knowledge came without effort, where wisdom was instantaneous. But with the help of the other 4, who shared their experience, told how they broke free, Katrina also found the strength to choose reality. True wisdom, she whispered, waking, comes not from easy access to knowledge, but from the effort to understand it, from mistakes you make along the way, from questions that have no simple answers. 5 students sat together in the hospital wing, shaken, tired, but alive and free. Madame Pomfrey bustled around them, making sure everyone was healthy, giving potions to support their strength. Madame Pince stood aside, watching them. Her heart was full of relief and pride. They had done it. All together. They had chosen reality over illusion. But one question remained. What to do with the Codex Animae? As if hearing her thoughts, Professor Dumbledore entered the hospital wing. His face glowed with joy when he saw the students. Wonderful work, my young friends, he said warmly. And you, Irma? You saved them not by force but by wisdom. Exactly as Rowena would have wished. He approached Madame Pince. Come, he said quietly. It is time to finish this. They went together to the library. The case with the original codex still stood in Madame Pince's office, and copies of the books had flooded the shelves throughout the library. Dumbledore took the original from the case and placed it on the desk. The book lay quietly, almost humbly. That pulse of magic that had been so strong before was now barely perceptible. It knows, said Dumbledore softly. The Codex knows it has lost its victims. And perhaps for the first time in centuries it understands. Madame Pince carefully touched the cover. The book was warm but not threatening. Almost grateful? She opened the volume. The pages no longer breathed so intensely. The ancient runes glowed weakly. And on the first page appeared new words. Not in the ancient language but in modern. As if the Codex wanted to be understood, I was created to teach through experience. But I became a trap. Because I forgot the most important lesson Rowena meant to convey. True knowledge comes not from the realization of desires, but from understanding their nature. Wisdom lies in choosing reality over illusion, even when the illusion is more beautiful. You have shown this. You taught those who were in my captivity to make the choice. And by this you completed what Rowena could not complete. I shall hunt no more. I shall rest. But before I go to sleep, I leave this message. The greatest wisdom is understanding the difference between dreams and reality, and the courage to choose reality. The words gradually vanished, dissolving into the yellowed paper. The Codex Animae shuddered one last time as if sighing, and fell still. Madame Pince felt the magic leave the book. Not completely. It was still there, sleeping deep within. But it no longer threatened, no longer hunted. What shall we do with it? She asked Dumbledore. The headmaster pondered. We cannot destroy it, nor should we. It is part of Hogwarts, history, part of Rowena's legacy. But we can protect it, make sure no one finds it by accident. He reached out, and from the office wall emerged a small safe, hidden by protective magic. Inside was a velvet cradle. Here, said Dumbledore, it shall be safe. Under my personal protection and your supervision, Irma. And perhaps someday, when the right time comes, someone will be able to learn from it what Rowena truly meant to teach. Madame Pince carefully placed the codex in the safe. Dumbledore closed the lid and laid powerful protective charms on it. Golden light wrapped around the safe, then it vanished into the wall again, as if it had never existed. And the book copies throughout the library began to disappear one by one, dissolving in the air as if they had never been. The library became ordinary again, quiet, peaceful. Winter had fully come to Hogwarts. Snow that had fallen during the night lay in a thin layer on the roofs, and the world seemed cleaner, fresher. The castle shone with festive decorations. Students prepared for the holidays. The 5 freed students returned to normal life. They were closer now, bound by a shared experience they could not share with others. Sometimes Madame Pince saw them sitting together in the library, talking quietly, supporting each other. Eleanor came to her most often. They did not speak much, just sat together, read, enjoyed the silence. But once the girl said something that Madame Pince would remember forever. Thank you for asking me if this was truly what I wanted. No one had ever asked me that before. Everyone assumed they knew. But you gave me a choice, and that changed everything. Madame Pince smiled, touching the girl's hand. The most important thing I have learned in all these years among books, she said quietly, is that knowledge is not the goal, it is a tool. A tool for helping people find their own path. Make their own choice. That evening, when all the students had left, and the library plunged into silence again, Madame Pince stood by the window, watching the snow fall over the lake. Her hand unconsciously touched the wall, where the safe with the Codex Animae was hidden. The book slept there, deep beneath protective charms. Perhaps forever. Or perhaps someday, many years from now, someone would find a way to use it as Rowena had intended. Not as a trap, but as a teacher. But that would be another story. Another time. Other people who would make their choice. But for now, Madame Pince returned to her desk, where a pile of books awaited cataloguing. Ordinary work, simple work, real work. And exactly as she loved it. Beyond the window snow fell, covering Hogwarts with a white blanket. Somewhere in the castle, students laughed, studied, grew. Somewhere professors prepared lessons. Somewhere the headmaster in his office pondered the mysteries of the world. And in the library reigned silence. The calm, wise silence of thousands of books preserving their knowledge, waiting for those who would come to seek it. And Madame Irma Pince, Hogwarts librarian, smiled, returning to her work of protecting these books, helping students find the right answers, but most importantly, helping them ask the right questions, because that, in the end, was where true wisdom lay.